Hello, my name is Carol Mills, and today I'm going to be talking about stuck places and how that related to a thesis that I wrote using autoethnography as one of the methodologies. Getting stuck and writing blocks are often seen as problematic and needing intervention. In a doctorate, there is the added pressure to ensure that the thesis is completed within the allocated time frame. Going overtime can cause anxiety, both for the candidate and for supervisors. Stuck places, however, are not always perceived by researchers as a hindrance, but rather, if interrogated and worked through, can be a way of uncovering new knowledge. Just a basic overview of my thesis. My thesis is an interdisciplinary study that draws on my experience of establishing a tourism floatplane business with my husband Paul on Magnetic Island within the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park in Australia. The thesis describes events from the developmental stage of the business through to Administrative Appeals Tribunal in 2007 on the legality of floatplane operations in the marine park that was, at that time, the subject of extensive media attention and community protest, both for and against the project. I don't think of this experience as a series of events or epiphanies, but as a story, a narrative, something that had a beginning, middle and an end. It was a narrative that was initiated by the media reporting of the events and the resulting public commentary. Before the events that I narrate, I'd not thought of myself or my lived experience in terms of a narrative. As a social theorist, I understand and write about being a social actor. However, there is a difference between being a social actor within a particular social cultural setting and being a social actor who has a narrative publicly told about them and parts of their life. As an audience member for the text from the time period, I had the uncomfortable experience of being both present and absent at the same time. Although I cannot recall a distinct moment in time when I knew it had become part of a narrative, it was something that both my husband and I were aware of. The media text created a discordance, an unsettling that was accentuated by post-event legal reports and academic articles. This unsettling extended to my own writing as I began telling about my experiences. The reported stories drew on two dominant Western male narratives, the hero and the Aussie battler. The framing of our personal struggles within these narratives was successful in gaining public support for our business because audiences were able to identify the moral and cultural issues that underpinned them. Over time, however, they became the way in which the public related to my husband Paul and myself and our roles in the business. In line with the hero story, my husband was given the starring role of the Red Baron, although at times is interchanged with the aircraft because of his distinctive dual wings and red paintwork. I appeared in some of the media stories, but not in others, and because of this, my role in the business and the conflict was not always visible. The price I would pay for the framing was not immediately obvious. While it was annoying that the public didn't see my real or authentic role in the business, I was accepting and compliant with the framing because I believed it would help our case. The issue of how I'd become an object of the narrative became an obstacle that I rarely discussed, but was constantly with me every time I sat down to write. There are a number of reasons why a traditional empirical study was not feasible. And these included ethical, legal and social reasons. I was still living in the community with my husband where the events took place. We were running a business, and also the events I was talking about had also been the subject of a legal case. Moving disciplines allowed a greater flexibility in the type of text I wanted to create. For those not familiar with a creative writing thesis, it's usually set, in Australia at least, by the university, and it will also infer a methodology. So the model that Curtin University uses, the university where I did my thesis, is a research question model, and it's divided into two parts. So the exegesis is the analytical or academic component, and the creative component in my case was a memoir. So even though my overriding methodology was autoethnography, I still had to comply with the university's model. The important part of this model, which was sometimes difficult to execute, was that the two parts were said to be independent from one another, and it was only related by the research question. So in starting to write my own story, I was influenced by Brodke, who says that narrative the same story cannot exist in isolation from one another. And I felt really captured by this idea, and I would often talk about the problems I had writing and about the story that stole my life. About halfway through, I had a crisis of identity. I wrote to my supervisor saying I don't know who I am. I don't know if I am a social scientist using creative writing techniques, or a creative writer drawing on my experiences and expertise as a social scientist. This was compounded, I observed, by the loss of identity because our story has already been told and our characters cast in a number of different texts, and also by the whole phenomenon of the Red Baron in Townsville and Magnetic Island. My creative work flatlined, and at best was a collection of fragmented memories, while at its worst, it either supported or opposed the already public texts about the conflict. My writing was polemic and did not move beyond the understanding of the events from my own experience. Recalling and writing about the tribunal hearing was particularly difficult. In my writing diary, I observed, one of the things I've noticed that I have an actual physical response to writing about the hearing. There are times when I feel so physically exhausted, I just can't keep going. I was only able to move forward by separating the creative work and drawing on theory of narrative and using creative writing techniques in order to write the memoir. So I adapted the model that the university set. So I still complied with the model. However, what I did to make it more cohesive was in the academic literature informed the creative work. So this informed what images I wanted to write about. And images from the creative work informed the exegesis and what themes I wanted to research in the text. The creative was past reflective, and the exegesis became present reflective. Writing about the actual legal case was particularly difficult, and often in the legal literature, the way people experience the law is thought of as Kafkaesque, so that often people don't understand the law unless they are a legal person, and it can feel very very daunting to be involved in a legal case if you don't understand the processes. Part of my problem was that the tribunal wasn't a standard court of law, it was a hybrid institution. And rewriting this became very difficult, particularly when I was trying to convey what was happening to other people who were reading the text. And often as readers perceived I was trying to retry the case rather than understand what was happening and look for closure. So in order to resolve this, I found that it was easier to write about the actual tribunal case and in the exegesis, and write about my own feelings in the creative work. Handling the trauma, which I refer to as embodied, was resolved in a similar way to those experienced by Jonathan Franzen when he had difficulty writing the novel The Corrections because of his biographical connections. Franzen reported that he wrote around, not through, the confrontational sections, and similarly I found that I could only deal with the tribunal hearing by writing up to and beyond it rather than through it. So for the hearing itself, I relied heavily on transcripts, and I drew on reflective, investigative writing techniques of creative non-fiction writers such as Chloe Hooper and Helen Gardner. I found that getting stuck is part of my research writing process, and some of the ways in which getting stuck and unstuck informed the thesis resulted in new knowledge, such as taking me beyond the polemic and giving me a greater understanding of how I fit into more of a cultural context. It helped me develop and adapt the research model, which highlights the importance of reflexivity. It added to the understanding how persona identity is constructed in texts, and it added to the understanding of writing trauma and the Kafkaesque. Not all of my problems were resolved within the thesis. However, many of the processes I developed as a researcher and the willingness to embrace getting stuck has been invaluable in my current work. Thank you for listening.